Thank you for joining us on our journey here to preserve the history of mixed martial arts. When I wanted to take on this project, I needed help. I brought in one of my favorite matchmakers, Miguel Iturrate, and the MMA detective, Mike Davis. So to do this, we've been able to preserve history. Welcome and enjoy.
Hey, Miguel Iturrate here. This is the Lights Out podcast, and we are back. Favorite territory, deep dive, and Chris Lytle is off at BKFC land. He will join us if he can, but I'm with the MMA detective, Mike Davis, and we have off camera, but online, MMA and Lions Den legend, Scott Bessac. Scott, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good, man. How you guys doing?
Terrific. Mike, take it away.
So here's the thing about Scott Bessac. Is he a household name? You know, probably somebody you may not have heard of. But Scott, why don't you inform our audience when you started with the Lions Den?
Well, I played like professional football for 4 years, and I was a dirty player, and I kept getting booted out of league until I'm playing for a league making like $17.50 a month, and my ex-wife, someone was just like, there's no way we can live on this. You used to make this in a couple of days. You got to do something else. You're just banned from everything. So I was like, okay. So I went in, I just looked at the newspapers, and I saw there was a home in Lockford for delinquent boys, and it was Bob Shamrock. So I go in there, you know, and I have 2 degrees in pre-law and minor in philosophy, you know, so I do have an education, and, you know, so he hired me. And that's how I met Ken, was working for Bob.
Well, was Ken working for Bob at the time, or was Ken living there?
No, Ken had a house like that, was kitty corner from Bob's with Tina and his boys, his little guys. And Ken at that time was in Fujiwara Gama.
It's at pro wrestling for those at home, Japanese pro wrestling.
Yeah, Fujiwara, the guy, you know, Gotch, all them guys taught him. But yeah, Fujiwara, he was in Fujiwara Gama. And I would watch all the tapes, you know, because Bob would be gone all the time, so I'd kick it and watch all the tapes. And would be like, hey, man, get me into this, man. You know, I'm still an athlete, you know, and he's like, no, I never trained nobody. I was like, okay, whatever. And, but, you know, we got to be friends, and he came over and played golf on the TV a lot. We went and played racquetball, that kind of stuff. And then everything kept going how it was. And I went up to San Andreas, did my fingerprints, and a couple months later, I come to my afternoon shift at the boys' home, and Bob and Ken are both standing in the front of the front door, and I'm like, hey, excuse me, guys, I need to get through here. And Bob is like, Scott, I can't let you in the house. And I'm like, why can't you let me in the house? He said, well, your fingerprints came back, and you have a file with the FBI. And I have. I wasn't convicted of it, but, you know, I have like attempted murder of a police officer on my record, and brandishing. I just have a bunch of violent stuff on there. So I wasn't allowed back in with the boys, according to the state. So Ken's standing in the driveway by then, and I just looked at Ken, and I'm like, dude, are you going to train me now? And he goes, yeah, I'll train you. And that's how that started.
See, it was Shamrock's home, was it like a gym? Like, was it like built around Ken, or were there other children or boys that were like, you know, not athletes?
You mean his kids?
Bob Shamrock's, like the boys' home.
Like, was it strictly for athletes?
No, Bob's boys' home was for like delinquent boys. These were like gangbangers, guys that, you know, these were
Gotcha.
It wasn't at group home as much as it was for delinquent boys.
Gotcha.
Okay. So they sent you for some fingerprints, came back kind of bad, sideways. We'll call it sideways. You're not allowed to work there.
Yeah, well, it's sideways. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's.
But I worked there. I worked there for a while. It wasn't until I worked there for a while. Everything was fine. Everything was great until that happened, and then it wasn't.
So at that point, like when Ken started to train you, as you had said, who else was there? An actual Lion's Den at that point, or was this the beginning of it?
No, in the beginning when Ken said yes, it was just me and him, and see, he was still in Fujiwara Gama.
Okay.
So we would go to like Twin Arbors racquetball court where we played racquetball, but they had like these little blue fold up mats. I don't know what they were for, calisthenics or something. And we would take them and fold them all out on the court, and then he would roll around and show me submissions, or in his house upstairs in his attic, his dad's backyard, wherever it was, and lift weights, and we would just do that until Lion's Den got opened.
Okay, so you predate the Lion's Den.
Yeah.
Okay, so there we go. I mean, there is nobody that we can talk to that is that got there before Scott Bessac, just for our listening audience. Now let's talk about the training sessions. Like, we talked to Pat Miletich, Monty Cox, Jeremy Horn, Spencer Fisher in regards to the MFS training and just how brutal it was. From what I gather, the Lion's Den was even more intense. Would you mind telling us about some of the training, as well as what you guys refer to as the jump-ins, and maybe how some of that started there?
Yeah, the jump-in. I used, I don't know which UFC, I don't know if I was fighting or not, but in an interview, I used that where I said we jumped him in. And Bob got furious at me. He was really told me, don't say that again. That sounds like gang stuff. But then it got popular. Now everybody says jump him in. But yeah, Ken jumped me in for an hour because I was going to be the guy that ran his dojo when he wasn't here. I was supposed to be his prodigy. The Japanese came over before I was to fight and took, article and picture. So I was, going to be there taking care of more things, teaching classes. So he jumped me in for an hour, and that was, and me being 6'5", 285 pounds. I mean, I could, bench press a truck, and I looked at him as maybe, a really undersized middle linebacker, maybe at most, So I wasn't too worried when we started. And then I'm not going to lie to you, he completely, for 30 minutes, beat the holy shit out of me. I never experienced that. I've never lost a fight, so much less experienced that. It was terrible. It was horrible. I literally couldn't walk for a week. I had to crawl to my front door.
Wow. So
yeah,
who was the next person to get the jump in, as what you refer to it as?
I believe it was Vernon.
So Vernon Tiger White was number 3.
Yeah, because Vernon was when Ken and I talked about before UFC 1 or whatever, when it was just me and him were training, just me and him would train together, but we had in the very beginning when we opened it up, I'm not sure he really knew what to do with it. Neither did I, of course. But we had like classes for women's and children's self-defense. We had kickboxing classes, submission classes, all this kind of stuff, and I taught them all. But over the years, like as we became more of a fighting, style gym, then the women and kids that went, and we became a different style to where we taught, the submission. But everybody, sometimes 1 or 2 times a day we'd have challenge fights with guys who just come in and challenge you. Or
like people would show up at the dojo. Scott, I apologize. People would show up at the dojo wanting to challenge the people inside Lions Den.
Usually one, because like say I was out and I'd be out with Simone and we'd be eating dinner, and and for some reason, I don't know why they'd say it, but or at Walmart or wherever, guys would walk up on me and go, "Hey, dude, I saw your fight on pay-per-view, and I have it taped, and I watched it like 50 times in a row, and I know all your flaws, and now I know I can kick your ass." And you're there with your wife, and you're like, "Okay, that sounds great, bro," but I carried around a big stack of Lions Den cards on me, and I would give them a card and say, "Hey, you come down on Monday and we'll hook it up." And so we had lots of guys that did that.
Wow. Hey, I got a question, because so we got Vernon in as number 3, but another guy that I'm wondering, did he spend time in California, is Guy Mezger? Because Mezger's a guy that, I was around Ken and Guy together, and Guy had respect. Like Ken was like his peer, not like he didn't treat Guy like he treated Bohlander and Mikey, Was Guy ever in California with that group, or was his Texas Lions then just come later?
Well, he was, but see, it was it was like a wolf pack, and like Jerry, Bohlander and Pete Williams and, Hagar Chin and guys like that. The other guys that we had, Christian, and he dropped out, and those guys were like young boys. So
you're referring to as like the Japanese young boys that would kind of cater to the older cagey veterans. Okay.
Right. We beat the hell out of them and then make them clean their gym. I'm on the phone, Ken, with a podcast thing. Yeah. So, plus Guy, I think Guy maybe come to California twice, maybe.
Okay.
So how does he become Lions Den if he's only been there twice?
Okay. Well, him and Trey
Telling,
I guess, and like UFC, I think UFC 3, Guy was at UFC 3 and talked to Ken and, wanted to, get into Lions Den after seeing, what it was about. But told Ken he had his own dojo in Dallas and da-da-da-da-da. Well, he came in and Vernon jumped Guy in. And that's the only, I can tell you flat out, and I've seen hundreds and hundreds of jump-ins and challenges. And that's the only one that I can say definitive was a draw.
Wow. So reading between the lines, what you're saying is Guy was already a pretty prepared guy and then joined Lions Den.
Yeah, well, he was already, I think he said he was like 28-2 in kickboxing and held the title down in Texas or something. And yeah, so he was already, fighting and doing all that. And then he got in the OC. And then when he got jumped in, Vernon submitted him a lot. But man, they stood up and just thumped the shit out of each other. It was even. They both were just beat up. And so.
Okay. So let's kind of rewind just a little bit, man. Miguel, that's on my list, dude. Good question. So what Frank Shamrock is doing time for armed robberies. He comes out of jail. Is he also doing the Fujiwara stuff prior to prison, or does his beginning in MMA start at Lion's Den? Is he jumped in? Bring us through Frank Shamrock, please.
Okay. No. Okay. Bob would show pictures of Frank in like his little Polaroids of how cut up Frank was and all this stuff. And, immediately I didn't like Frank. And I'm not going to go into it because people that are kind of in the know. But Bob was, a certain way. And, it really bothered me. He adopted two guys and exactly looked that way. It just, so right from the get-go, I'm like, had something against Frank because he was like Bob's wonder child. Well, Bob brought him right from Folsom Prison into Lion's Den, and Frank still had hair, like it looked like an Indian. It longer than my hair used to be when I was playing football. It was all the way down to his waist. And they come in, and before I told Ken, man, dude, bro, please let me jump Frank in. Because I really wanted to be the one to hurt him. And Ken's like, nope. He's all, I'm jumping him in because he's got to respect me. So they get in, they stretch around. And then Ken, I think if there would have been cops there, he would have been arrested for attempted murder. He was dropping knees in his face. He was knocking him. He was beating him to death. And
was Bob there?
I'm not really, huh?
Was Bob Shamrock there witnessing this?
Bob actually taped everything. So is there all these jump-ins are taped on VHS?
Oh wow! And he didn't try to stop this.
No, I guess he figured Ken had to do what Ken did. So, about 15 minutes into the half an hour jump in, it's like me, Vernon. I'm not sure who else. I'm not sure if Jason was there or not yet. But we all look at each other and we go, well, wait a minute. Did anybody tell Frank he could tap? And we're like, no. And I'm like, damn it. I'm like, Frank, whenever you get caught in a submission, you could tap him or the mat. And Frank looked at me like, oh, fuck, now they tell me. So then Frank started tapping. So halfway through the fight, Frank didn't even know he could tap. It was brutal. And Frank says, I guess his knee that Ken tore out is still at the end of his career bothered him. But Ken beat him bad, and then just got up and walked out the gym like, fuck you.
Gotcha.
Wow. So
yeah.
Frank, was he a hoodlum at this time, or was he able to kind of turn it around? You're talking about a guy that was doing armed robbery that he did time in Folsom. Did he ever lose that prison mentality, or was that always kind of prevalent when he was at the Lion's Den?
He never had a prison mentality, and he said things that kind of were odd to me because of me knowing that game. I was in the game since I was 17, so he just had a really hard life when he was young. I don't know if you heard about when he was a kid, but real bullshit. Sleeping out in a tent for months at a time because he couldn't come inside. And he just had a shitty childhood. So when he got the armed robbery, it was just kind of like some bullshit armed robbery thing where he broke into a place and they caught him running away and stuff. It wasn't just Frank being a flat out gangster.
Okay.
So he would tell me, like, because he had a feather on his toe and a naked woman on his ass.
Like a tattoo?
Like,
you mean a tattoo?
Yeah. And I'm prison ink, because I got prison ink on me, and I'm like, well, what's up with that, bro? And he's like, oh yeah, I just decided to get that. I'm like, huh. Because that's usually But then he would tell me, yeah, dude, I can walk all the yards. No one says a word and I can walk all the yards. And I'm like,
Wait a minute.
So I don't really know.
Scott, wait, hold up. We got it. I can't let this go.
Yeah.
He's got a naked woman, like in detail, or like a silhouette of like a trucker mud flap on his butt.
No, in detail, like written, like drawn on his ass.
That's one of those dead giveaways. But let's just move forward. Okay. So go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, if he'd have been someone else, I would have told him exactly what he was. I thought, okay, maybe it's just coincidence or something.
Okay. Neither here nor there. Rough childhood. Let's go. Keep going.
Yeah. So he never had like a real gangster attitude, and he, like I read a little bit in his book or something. He came in and he said that Ken was like the head of the cavemen, and we were all the rest of the cavemen, and he said that everybody there really liked hurting other guys, and they also could take a tremendous amount of punishment. And for him, he said it was hard for him to understand because he never played sports. He was like a hacky sack guy. So he didn't understand the, like he said, machismo of the whole thing of, beating to death your team member. And so it for Frank, it was quite a shock.
So how soon before Frank kind of caught up with you guys? Because I mean, arguably he's one of the most talented guys on paper to have come from the Lions Den.
Yeah, for me, and I say this just so I don't sound like a dick. For me personally, all the years I trained with Frank was nothing I even thought about. Sparring, Frank couldn't spar his way out of a paper bag. He had short arms. He had nothing to worry about. On the ground, Frank was weak. He wasn't strong, so I could just do anything I wanted to him. And I remember in the book it's the same book where only thing I looked at was because my name was highlighted in yellow. And Frank said that he knew he could really become a fighter when he rear naked choked Scott Bessac. Well, he didn't rear naked choke me. It was before my second UFC when I left the Lions Den. So it was at the very end. But late at night after I taught all the classes, he asked if I wanted to roll. And after about half an hour, he caught me in a head and arm triangle choke. And I could not pull it out. And I'm like, oh, just screw it. I'm too tired. And I tapped. And so he said then he knew he'd be a fighter. But,
well, his first fight is Bas Rutten. And it's kind of a controversial win, but I recently had watched it, and I thought Bas kind of won, but Frank had a hell of a showing. So I think we can both at least agree, like to meet on common ground, that Frank was a pretty good athlete.
Yeah, okay. I can say for normal humans, yes, he was. For guys like Ken and I, who, and I'll say for me, I won't speak for another man, but for me, who is 285, I had 21-inch arms, I'm bench pressing and declining and squatting, the same as power lifters. I'm massive, and for Frank to like even move me out of a position for a submission was impossible. I controlled him like I controlled a rag doll. And so did Ken. But for a normal human, Frank was like he was fast and like agile and he could slip in and out of stuff. But if you just hold him down, he couldn't do anything. But,
let me ask you a little bit, a lot of the fight game is mind, obviously the strength of mind, and you got to be, that seems to be something that Pancrase is Pancrase with the open hand, even Boss Rutten. Frank comes in, he's competing at a high level, but he got his ass kicked in a real NHP fight, like when he went in there by John Lober. And that seemed to be something like he wasn't prepared for that. Were you around him then? Is that something that was he mentally catching up to?
He was, Bob kept wanting to push him because as soon as because Bob didn't, he didn't adopt Frank until Frank was 21 years old. He didn't adopt Frank until Frank was at Lions Den in order to give him the Shamrock name. So Pancrase would push him up the line, and they did push him up the line. And even Frank admits, he looks back and goes, "Oh yeah, I guess there's no way I could have got Funaki's foot like that." But yeah, they pushed him up, which kind of pissed me off. And then he got into it with Lober, and Lober, I mean, Lober's a fighter, man. He'll fight you out back in a bar. He'll fight you in a park. He'll fight you in an alley. He don't give a shit. The dude's a fighter. And Frank was just not ready because Pancrase is a lot more technical and submission wise and things like that. And he went against Lober, who Lober just wanted to knock his fucking teeth out, and he did.
Yeah. I got the sense. I was at the rematch and he had changed, but early on it looked like he wasn't ready.
All right, so at the Lions Den, Jerry Bohlander is coming to the forefront and is getting a little bit of notoriety. When he is walking to the ring, it's almost as if the announcers are instructed to say that he has Lions Den fighter Jerry Bohlander, trained by Frank Shamrock. He always made sure that he was always in the corner of Jerry Bohlander and that the announcers mentioned that Frank trained Jerry. Could you describe their relationship?
That might be when, I don't know which ones were those had to be when Frank was before him and Ken got a fight and Ken hit him with the computer and Frank left, right? I mean, that had to be when
that's my
Frank
next question.
He was still with Lions Den. So, I don't know. I don't remember any of that.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe Bob was trying to do that. Maybe, I don't know.
Okay. So here, you're not sure. My MMA tinfoil hat conspiracy is that when Ken and Frank left, that Jerry Bohlander was somebody that they were playing tug of war with, because there were 3 or 4 fights where Ken, it was trained by Frank Shamrock, Frank Shamrock's cornering and other people. Ken would be in the audience and not cornering Jerry, and Ken would, he if he was like doing commentary or there as a guest, he would make his way to the corner, but it was always Frank in there. When Frank left, was there a tug of war for Jerry Bohlander? Did they make Jerry Bohlander choose between the two of them?
That I do not know, because that would have to be conversations between men that I wasn't there.
Okay.
So, if Frank did ask Jerry to go, and he also would have asked Pete, because they were like, combined set. They're both from Livermore. Yeah. So I don't know. I know Jerry was really loyal to Ken, and he was loyal to Bob. Bob liked Jerry because he was wholesome. He was very wholesome. And so I don't know. I just know once Ken went to WWF, the Lions then just went, okay. He was gone. Who's running it? You know what I mean? It
seemed like Frank, from an outsider, but like I was around those UFCs and knew all those guys. It seemed like Frank kind of abandoned ship to form I think they called it the Alliance with Maurice Smith and TK.
He left with Bob Cook, too.
Well, Maurice is, he was with us. I mean, he was always hanging around with us. He's the one that taught us, Muay Thai. He's the one that, thank God got me to where he talked. I told him about how he sparred every day, and he's like, "What? You do what?" And I'm like, yeah, because on the bullet train one time, we're going to fight in some city in Japan, and I'm sitting next to Maurice, and he was like, "Hey, that's a nice watch." I'm like, "Oh, thanks, bro." And I'm like, "Oh, hey, let me ask you a question." I'm like, I said, "How do you, strengthen up your shins every day?" He's all, "You just make sure you kick like a really long, heavy, totally full canvas bag." I'm all, so you don't kick shin to shin every day in sparring? And he goes, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, for the past couple of years or however more, we've kicked shin to shin. And he's all, with no sparring gear. I'm like, no. And I would get like huge hematomas all the way down my shins, and then the next day come in and have them get them busted back open. And so he talked to Ken, and we got a bunch of like regular shin gear and boxing gloves and headgear and stuff like that we never used before.
God bless Maurice.
Very, 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 very safety conscious, the Lions Den fighters.
When it started, he goes to me, there? Okay, when we started, when Lions Den opened, and Ken goes, "Okay, Scott, here's what I want." Well, he called me Scotty. Okay, Scotty, there's a martial arts like warehouse place up in Sacramento. I'm gonna write you a check. And he goes, he's all, "Remember that movie Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee?" I'm all, "Yeah." He's all, "Okay, remember when he's fighting that big dude?" I'm like, "Bolo Wong?" He's all, "Yeah." "Okay, remember he throws him down on the mat and he arm bars him?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I remember that." He's all, "Okay, those gloves though that he has on, they're fingerless, so you could do grappling. Plus you can punch." I'm like, "Yeah, those are Kempo gloves." He's all, "Okay, get like six sets of Kempo gloves, and then whatever you think we might need." So I go up there, and the guy, I'm telling this guy what we do, and he's like not believing me. Like, "Yeah, bullshit. Sure you do." And I'm trying to explain to him what we need, not really even knowing what we need because it's all brand new. So I get the Kempo gloves, and then he has these like 4 face masks, but with wire on the front of them, like the hockey kind. And so I get 4 of those. So we bring him back, and those wire masks last about a month before I smashed them all in on the other guys. And the Kempo gloves that's what we used, and we were shin to shin. Everything was no headgear. After I broke all the headgear, we just quit having headgear.
All right. Before we get too far away from the subject, I'm going to ask to interject. I apologize. So Ken and Frank, what was their fallout? What was the reason for the split?
Well, people are under the impression that since Bob and Ken since Frank and Ken are Bob's adopted kids, that Ken and Frank are close. Ken and Frank barely even know each other. Frank came way after Ken did. They weren't friends. They never hung out. They never did nothing. So Frank was just looked at as like whatever, Bob's guy, and they weren't buddies. So
what do you think drew Bob to Frank?
What I think drew Bob to Frank?
Yeah, I mean, you said 21-year-old. Who adopts a 21-year-old? Just let him live with you.
Well, I'm just going to say, because Bob still has like Ryan and Sean and grandchildren that are still alive, I'm just going to go ahead and let everybody surmise on what Bob was and listen to Bob and listen to Don Frye's interview of why Ken said he'd die in the ring before he got out, before the thing. That's Bob was, you know, a certain way, but I'm not going to do that. I don't want to, you know, for the grandchildren. And Bob was attracted to the bodybuilder type.
Okay. So the fallout, what started the fallout between them?
Between them was Frank thought Ken was not, all of a sudden Frank thought he was the most athletic one there, and he was the most, you know, all this. And I've heard him say in interviews about it. I've even heard him say he has an IQ of 140. And I'm like, really, bro? Under which test? Like Mensa, the Alma, there's like 20 of them. I took them all, and they're all. It's like Frank, but he just thought he was like the most athletic and of all of us, and we were just more the cavemen, you know, time. So he wanted Ken to like be like more evolved in the way he was training. He was getting tired of just getting the shit kicked out of him every day, because that's what we did. We just beat the shit out of him every day. And he was getting more frustrated and more frustrated. And then I guess Ken had to be somewhere for WW or something. And Frank was supposed to host some people that were coming in to see the UFC or the Lions Den. And Bob told Frank, you know, Ken said to do this, and Frank just said, fuck Frank, fuck Ken. So that's, I guess, some in one way or another, something like that happened. And
well, I don't want to get too far ahead, but, you know, when Ken left for WWE, that really was like a little, you know, the WWE has a huge schedule and stuff. He was gone. He was just disappeared, you know, and it felt like they were like rudderless, like a rudderless ship there, you know. But anyway, I digress. Mike, go ahead.
And
no, they were. He split, but guys that, you know, when they weren't there when I was there earlier in the years, when, you know, and Ken put this in his book, you know, the Shamrock, the book he wrote with Snowden, and Ken messaged me on Facebook to tell me, you know, go ahead, bro, and talk about the women and the drugs, all that. Just since we're friends, please don't speak about anything personal we talked about. So I have no problem since he said that about the drugs and the women. But there was a time earlier at the UFC when I was just running the damn UFC, and he was out just doing mass amounts of meth, and at the strippers club called Richards. And Jonathan Snowden, when he wrote Shamrock, even got in touch with the Richards manager to find out who's Ken's favorite stripper was. And so he would be gone for like God knows how long. And then he would just come in one day and like suplex one of my submission students on the mat and walk out. I'm like, okay. So you know,
was Ken just an occasional user of methamphetamine, or was it something that like he'd walk into the gym tweaking?
Well, he told me before Robbie got out, he said, bro, listen, he said, because Robbie had just done 10 years for possession.
Now, Robbie, I apologize, Scott. Robbie at home, Robbie is Ken's blood brother, who's actually, I think he's back in jail right now. So go ahead. Yeah,
Robbie Kilpatrick.
Yeah. And
he has another brother, Ronnie, but Ronnie had some strokes from what I heard. Jonathan told me. But yeah, and so when Robbie was getting out of jail, and then Ken had gave me his IROC, but he had like traded the pink slip for drugs, so I got it took from me by the cops. But yeah, before
he
Robbie
was
got
out like
out,
that?
Ken, huh?
He was upside down like that, like losing cars and stuff.
Oh yeah, Robbie, not Ken.
Oh, Robbie. Okay, I'm like, holy shit.
Robbie.
But you mentioned Ken's
Ken
drug
said,
use.
well, yeah, they like, okay, before Robbie got out, Ken and I were talking, just me and him BSing, and he said, listen, he said, whatever you do, do not give a line to Robbie, bro. He's not like me and you who can just do a line and then go party the rest of the night. He has a mass problem with it. I'm like, okay. Now, I was like, listen to that. But then down the road, I'm like, I'd watch Ken and be like, crap. I think, he would, he'd go off on his missions.
Okay, so when did Ken's heavy drug use start? Like, at what point in his career?
I would say it was always there, but I would say it didn't get big until probably until he got like people knew who he was. And then it seemed to get bigger, and he liked to go to more places, and like at night sometimes, because Tina and Simone, his wife and my wife, they were friends, and they'd be back to the house, and Ken and I would go out for a beer. Well, we'd go to like one bar like Willie G's, and all these people would surround us and be like, oh, Ken Shamrock, and they'd be like, they'd be like, oh, Scott, I saw you fight, or want autographs, and huddle around us. Okay, when they mingled away, in like 3 minutes, Ken would be like, hey, bro, I'm tired of this bar. Let's go to the one down the street. We go to the one down the street, we get mobbed by a bunch of people. And then when he would do that over and over, he loved the attention of the whole thing.
Okay.
You mentioned women, I'm sorry, you mentioned women too, and I'd like to share a story that was a rumor around the UFC. Maybe you could describe what it was like, but he came back to one of the UFCs after his stint in WWE, and Tina was with him. And the rumor was that he had a girlfriend on a different floor in the hotel. Like, is that the kind of because it sounds like he had that risk, like enjoys the risk type of thing personality.
Well, okay, I can tell you one, and I did tell Jonathan for the book, so it's probably in that Shamrock book. But I think we're in Casper, Wyoming, and Simone had went down to Tina's parents because Tina was from El Cajon. So they went down there, and then Simone and Tina were coming up 3 days, before the women show up. But I get this phone call, this panic phone call, and it's from Guy. And Guy's like, Scott, Ken just called me. He's got a girl in his room. And we were at the Hyatt where, they have balconies on the inside of the Hyatt, where you can see over into the lobby and all that. And he's all, Simone and Tina are coming up the stairs. You got to stop them. And I'm like, fuck. So I got the phone. I go running down 3 flights of stairs, and I'm talking to him and everything. Hey, baby, hey, midget, how you doing? Hey, Tina, trying to stall him, right? And someone's like, we're holding back. Let us go. We're tired, and I'll talk when we get back. I'm like, okay, hey, Tina. Well, Tina came up to Ken's door and knocked on the door, and Ken opened the door, looked at her, and then closed the door. And Tina was like, what the fuck are you doing? And he's all, oh, I'm naked. And she's like, what do you mean you're naked? Open the door. Well, in a few, he opened the door shorts on. And she was like, what are you doing, man? And putting her stuff down. And then in the corner, she saw this bright pink gym bag with a blue handle, a little unicorn or something on it, whatever it was. And she's like, who the fucks is that? And what had happened was the girl, she went out the glass doors of the balcony and ran down to Guy's room and ran into Guy's room, but left her bag of stuff in Ken's room. So Ken, he actually got her to believe that was one of the fighter's bags. So that's how close he got, and even got closer than that. She caught him a couple times.
I would say it was Bob Shamrock's. This is Bob's bag. That's what it says. All right.
It was what?
I would say it was Bob Shamrock's bag. That's what I would say, based on your earlier statement.
Yeah, maybe.
So let's rewind just a little bit. That's a little crazy. Did Ken ever go into a fight high?
High on drugs?
Yes.
Okay. We all went into Japan when they shot us all with carpacol,
what is that for the people at home?
Carpacane. Is. Have you ever seen like the Japanese fighters and they have all that white tape all over their legs and stuff?
Yeah.
In pancreas, they get it like covered over, but we did. But like Boss, Ken, me, we're all back there. Carpacane is like a shorter acting lidocaine. So if you got a bruise, if you got a fractured bone, if you got something, the doctors will be back there shooting you with carpacane for an hour if you need to. So there was that. And then after the fights, the doctor, you would go in and he would all he would say was a lot of pain or little pain. And you'd always say a lot of pain. And then he'd hand you this huge handful of like these pills that look like Sudafed, but all different colors, and all in Japanese. You didn't know how many to take or what they were, but you just like take a couple and then go out partying and just hope for the best. But no, he never. I did see a fighter that you would laugh because it was him, rail a couple lines of meth. Right when I was walking by his curtain of his training room, and right before he was going in there, I'm like, bro, what the fuck are you doing? And he's like, I would do it before I get in the cage.
Could you tell us at least what event? Was it the UFC? You said cage. So was it UFC or was this a Japan event?
Oh, no, not in Japan, UFC.
Oh my God, that's a blind item. That right there, Miguel, ultimate UFC 7. That's MMA trivia. Crowbar. I hope you're taking notes. I would suggest you look at the nostrils and eye movement and jaw of the fighters going into the cage. So now that brings us to Oleg Taktarov. Now, Oleg also used to spend a lot of time with Ken and even lived with him briefly, training for a fight.
Right.
How was Oleg in the gym? Who rolled with him? What were the training sessions like?
Oleg as a person, I got along with really well. He was a very kind guy. He was a very ambitious guy and driven. He told me he was going to win one tournament and then go to LA and become an actor. And I'm like, bro, you can't even speak English. But he did. And then he went down with Robert De Niro in 88 minutes and had a starring role. I'm like, oh, you bastard. How'd you do that? But, he was a good guy. But in the gym, he never submitted me once. Matter of fact, he never took me down once. Not one time. And we even had a bet before we all were starting, and this is at the peak of how big I was getting and how many fucking roids I was taking. And he said that if he got me into an armbar where he had his legs over me and my hands were crossed, tightened, but he had his elbow inside my elbow. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. To where they work the hands until they can pull the arm back to armbar, right?
Right.
And I said, I'll bet you $100 that you can get in that position and you can never get me out of it. And he's like, okay. And he did it for a shitload of time, and finally just stood up and said, "No, too strong." And I got $100 for it.
Did you guys had a canceled fight with each other? Was that a little strange because you spent so much time on the mat with him?
Well, and you know, he kind of when people have said about that poster on MMA Museum or whatever, and they're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that poster is still there." My name's misspelled. It pisses me off, but whatever. And you know, people are like, "Oh, I wish," you know, like a friend of mine put, "I wish that fight would have gone on," and then Oleg put on there too, like he wished too. Now, I'm not sure why Oleg thought I want, because I asked for the fight, and
Okay.
I'm not sure why he thought I did. Yeah, but I wanted the fight because I was going to start wearing gloves from after the Joe's Charles and breaking my hand in the first minute, and I wanted to be the first one to knock Oleg out, and that was the only reason I wanted to fight him. Not like I disliked him. I just wanted to put his lights out.
Okay. Training with Crazy Bob Cook. Were you ever on the mat with him?
No, and I always wanted to be, but I never got the chance. Just because when I heard he was just totally insane, so I wanted to, but I never got the chance.
So Frank, I mean, let's kind of look at the Frank Shamrock trajectory here. He leaves Lions Den for the Alliance. And with the Alliance, I think right around that same time, him, Javi Mendez, Frank, Javi Mendez, and Bob Cook also start AKA, of which Frank becomes a regular fixture and then leaves there as well. It's like, what's Frank's personality like in the gym? Is it hard? Is he a hard guy to get along with? Because it seems like he can't stay in a gym like for a set period of time.
No, the funny thing is, up until a certain personal experience, which I will not get into, Frank and I got along really well, because you could beat the whole. Okay, like when guys became Lions Den fighters, I would take them in the afternoon or whenever and catch them, you know, when the other guys were lifting, and I would bring him into the Muay Thai ring, and I'd say, "Let's just roll around." Well, we would roll around, and you know, pretty soon they'd be like, "Hey, you know, I'm getting tired," and I'd be like, "Whatever." And pretty soon they'd be like, "Dude, get off me," and I'd be like, "I'll get off you when I want to," and then I just keep going until I broke them. I wanted to break them, because breaking other men is like my favorite thing in life. So I would. And so a lot of guys I broke, but then I was nice about it. Some guys cried, but then I was nice and said, "Hey, you know, you just got the wrong job, and it's cool. You know, just go back home to Chicago and figure it out." But there were guys that I did that to multiple times, and the only way to break them was to kill them. And that was like with Bohlander, Pete Williams, Jeff Massalia. You just could not, Frank, you'd have to kill him, and he would not break. And so those guys you knew were going to be fighters.
Okay. Did you guys ever wander over to the Gracie Challenge and step in there? I mean, it was an open challenge. To me, that's something like it would be a dojo storm. That is something right up the Lions Den alley. How come something like that never took place?
Well, there was supposed to be a fight right in the very beginning of all this, of when everything first started. There was supposed to be a fight between the Gracie guys and the Lions Den guys. $50,000 winner takes all, depending on, you know, they'd count the fights and who won what, you know, who won the most fights, and they get $50,000. You know, so never happened.
All right.
But
Carlos,
again, before you
go ahead.
before UFC 3, Ken was showing me one of the Gracies, and he was walking back in a ponytail or like a rat tail. And he goes, "Hey, that's the guy right there that they're negotiating with for you to fight next." And I'm like, cool, whatever. Well, it turned out the guy with a little rat tail was Rickson. But at UFC 3, well, I fucking wanted to. I wanted to knock out Rickson too. I didn't think, I thought with gloves and standing and stop wrestling, I just was like, God, for God's sake, Ken, make me stop making me wrestle. I'm just not a wrestler. But he came into UFC 3. They sat him down. He was there with Helio and Art Davies. And they all say the same thing. They said they want him to fight in UFC 3, and he said for $1 million. And Art said, we can't afford that. And he got up and stormed away, and Helio like cussed him out about it. You know, we fight for honor, not money. And those two didn't talk for a couple of years.
Okay. So just so everybody at home knows, we've interviewed both Bob Myrowitz and Art Davey. Both confirmed that. Art gave us literally a play-by-play and in-person play-by-play. And Myrowitz.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to give another play-by-play then.
No, you're good. No, we're confirming that, bro. No. That's real.
If I could jump in,
that's real. Yeah.
I want to ask about Bohlander because we brought his name up a couple of times, but like, you said he started out as a young boy. Like, who broke him in? Who jumped him in? And he seems like a guy that I think he took an extraordinary amount of punishment in the gym. Like, I think he might have some PTSD from those days. You know what I mean? And I mean that respectfully.
Well, when we rolled, I like to roll with Jerry because Jerry was he went to the state finals with Tito in high school, but I guess Tito beat him in the state wrestling championship. But he was a really good wrestler. So I really liked wrestling with Jerry and just really, really beating the fuck out of him. So as to get a gauge of what I needed to do to a pure wrestler to get him to break off, to break away and panic, away from the wrestling. So yeah, I beat the hell out of Jerry all the time. Jerry never complained once. Jerry was a badass. Jerry just was like, go ahead and kill me. I don't care. And Pete was a guy I like to spar with because he was tall and had a long range, and neither of them complained ever.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me get one more Bohlander question. I gotta wrap back around to Rickson, Miguel, if you don't mind. So the Davey versus Goliath UFC had heavyweights versus guys that were, around 200 pounds. Originally, it was supposed to be Pete Williams representing the Lions Den, but you guys made he and Bohlander fight, and whoever won that fight, got to go to the UFC. What was that like in the gym, and how intense was it? Bohlander showed up at the UFC with like 2 black eyes and some heavy cutting on his, like some, I don't know, just some cuts, fresh cuts on his head still.
Well, see, I don't know, because at the UFC, at the Ultimate, that I fought in.
Yes.
The night before, Mr. Marowitz and Bob and Ken walk in with a contract, and Mr. Marowitz said, you did so well, in your last fight, and you're on a 4-fight win streak, and he said, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to sign you to a multi-fight deal. And so they signed me to a 3-fight deal for like triple what I was already making, which was already triple what any of the other fighters were already making that weren't Lions Den. And then also show money and all this other shit. And I was just like, there's only like a couple other guys in the UFC that even had contracts. I mean, Varlin asked for a contract or said he'd go do the IFC, and Mr. Marowitz were like, go ahead, go do it. I'm not giving you a contract. So I was really stoked that I signed a contract that night before, the ultimate. But when I fought Joe, we go out there. I went down to 250 or 214 pounds because I wanted to go in, knock him out, and that'd be it, quick. And I ended up breaking my hand on him in the first minute. And so, the rest of the fight went back and forth. I could feel my hand, but I couldn't squeeze it. And then into the 6th minute or whatever, he got on top of me, and he didn't really even have me in a submission, but he had my arm trapped, and if he would have kept going, it would have pushed because I had a boxing fracture like I always had on my left hand. It would have pushed the bone out of my skin. And I tapped because I'm like, either, I don't fight in 2 or 3 months, or I don't fight in a year because I have to have reconstructive surgery. So after the fight, Ken and I got, later into a big argument in the lobby of the hotel. And Ken said all this bullshit that was a lie. That, UFC didn't want me anymore. Pancras didn't want me anymore, which I got a letter from Campbell McLaren a week or a month later that, said I was suspended for 90 days with a broken hand. And as soon as I can get a letter from my doctor, send it right in, and they can't wait to have me back. So I know just Ken was mad, but he said, you're just not listening to me, and, you're doing your own thing, and you're ground and pounding and not smishing, blah, 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 blah. And, he's all, hey, the NFL, bro, you were in it, sometimes you just have to be on a different team. And that's when I went to Dallas.
That's when you went to where?
So I went to Dallas.
Okay.
So when UFC 8 was happening, I was actually at Andy and Marissa's house watching it live on pay-per-view.
Andy Anderson.
I don't have any clue.
You're talking about Andy Anderson, correct?
Yeah. That's who I went to live with in Dallas.
I love Andy. So could you give us I think Andy is kind of one of these forgotten footnotes in early UFC lore, and we're hoping to have him on soon. He's in prison right now. I think we've got to figure it out. We're going to be recording him in the next week or two. Could you tell us who Andy was to you, what he meant, any funny stories involving him?
I can tell you that Andy tried real hard to be part of the whole UFC thing, but he did it in a way to where Andy was very generous. Buy you lunch, buy you what do you need, he was always helpful. I mean, he was a good guy. Other people didn't like him, said he was a scumbag, did the ISC behind the UFC's back, did all that kind of stuff. And there's pictures in MMA Museum where it shows guys in my corner like Frank and Trey and everybody. And they're like, oh, man, there's Andy Anderson. He's everywhere, But for me, he was always really cool. He brought in the old wrestling coach for the Soviet Union that had trained Alexander Caroline the experiment and stuff. And I'm like, cool. So,
okay. So, so for instance,
he was. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Scott. I was just so fill in some blanks for me. Andy was rumored to be the owner of nude steakhouses, and that he was very wealthy, but his wealth, it could, I've heard he's got a couple $1 million, and then I've heard he had private planes and was close to 9 figures. What's your feeling on that? I know we like to throw it around, but what level did he play at? you stayed at his house.
Well, he owned in Arlington. He owned 2 strip clubs, like Hard Bodies, and one down the street.
Peepin' Toms.
Then one in the heart. Huh?
It was called Peepin' Toms.
Okay, Peepin' Toms. There you go.
Called. Yeah, I'm mentally ill.
The one Hard Bodies, that was like more upper class than the Peeping Toms one. Then he also had a topless steakhouse, but that went out of business pretty quick because like a state shut it down or something.
I think it was they couldn't have like naked women around, like food being served. Like he had them naked cooking. This dude was nuts. So go ahead.
Something. Okay, and then he had what I tripped out on because when he showed me when I went there with him, I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? But they were actually they're tanning salons, right? With tanning beds. And when I was playing football here, I owned 6 tanning salons and beauty salons hooked together. So I was used to tanning salons, right? Well, these tanning salons, you go in and the lady at the front door, like you have to give her your name, or you can't just like walk in, pay, and like tan, right? So I'm like, what the hell's going on? So she buzzes the door. We go in the back. Okay, in these tanning rooms are girls, and they will like strip down, do whatever for guys that are paying to watch them in these tanning salons. So I'm not even sure what that's called.
I think it's called prostitution. That's what you're looking for.
Okay, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if the girls touched him or not. I just know guys paid a lot of money to sit back there and do that, and
tan and watch chicks.
Hit the and hit those like snorting speed things and poppers or whatever those called, and yeah. So we had those, and then there's probably other things too, but
if I may interject. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like this podcast and you like this type of material, MMAfighting.com has got an article about Andy Anderson. And, Andy's kind of a nefarious character. He's got a lot going on. But in this article, who doesn't have a name attached to it, they refer to Andy Anderson as being a part of the Aryan Brotherhood. It could not be further from the truth. Please send MMAfighting.com. Yeah, dude. The author of that is a complete and total scumbag. Peepin' Tom's is a black nightclub. He had plenty of black people working for him, even sponsored black athletes.
Not only that, Marissa, who he was married to, was Chinese. His daughter is half Chinese and half Andy. How the fuck could Andy be the Aryan Brotherhood?
Okay.
How would that work?
I'm asking everybody at this point in the podcast, if you care about us, of course, like, share, subscribe. Please send MMA Fighting, because they're impossible to get a hold of. Let them know what you think about a false accusation like that, because it's the only place that exists, and they're taking liberties that just kind of, it doesn't sit well with me. Say whatever it is you want about Andy. That's not true. Let's bring it back to Rickson Gracie. All right. So you guys are supposed to fight. Go ahead. I apologize.
I really, besides Andy being, kind of a stretcher of the truth, he was a great storyteller, and a lot of them were true, but some of them really weren't. But it didn't matter because they were really funny. But he was always a good guy. He was in no fucking way was the Aryan Brotherhood. No way.
Thank you.
You're not married to a Chinese chick with a half Chinese daughter who was like little when I was out there with her and the Aryan Brotherhood. It doesn't work like that.
No. And it's a shame. Like that would hurt me. It's a credible. I mean, MMAfighting.com is a credible website. To maintain their credibility, it's probably right or wrong. It's been up for about 7-8 years since he's been in jail. All right. The Gracies.
That's crazy.
The Lions Den, there's supposed to be a collision course. you're supposed to deal with Rickson at UFC 3. He prices himself out. The rumor that I'm asking you to confirm was that Rickson sent one of his teachers, Carlos Valente, over to roll with you guys on more than one occasion in order to kind of get a feel for what the Lions Den was about.
Unfortunately for Dude, he did. And unfortunately for Dude, he rolled up on me. Yeah, the first time he came up, he told us he was like chief instructor or something for Rickson Gracie.
So he at least was honest with you guys. Cool. Okay.
Right.
He was honest with you guys.
He even gave me a VHR or VHS tape of him when he was a comedian on the Johnny Carson show. And I didn't believe, I'm like, oh, thanks, dude, whatever. But when I got home, me and Simone put it in, and he was a comedian on the Johnny Carson show. I'm like, oh, holy crap. But the first time was at the first dojo that we were at, and there was a little teeny dojo. And he went about 7 minutes, and then he quit. He said, man, you know, I know a lot of jiu-jitsu, but this fight and stuff, it's going to take a while to get this down. Well, a couple years later, he came back into the one where we had the big warehouse, and he came in with an actor, this big, huge, tall, bald black guy who was in Stargate. And I don't know if you remember when you remember Stargate with Kurt Russell? And
I don't watch movies, dude. I'm horrible with pop culture.
Well, it had Kurt Russell, and they go through a gate, and there's like an Egyptian guy comes down, is like the god, and he kills the guy with a purple ray. Well, that was that guy, that actor, and another dude. Okay. Now they go into Ken, in through our way, in through the weight room, into Ken's office. And they're in there for a while, and I'm like, okay, what the fuck's going on? What's going on? Finally, I was like, fuck it. So I go in there, but they're coming out. So Ken goes, Scotty, come in the office with me. I'm like, okay. He said, now listen. He said, this dude just said that that at that time the only way to get into Pancras was from the United States was through Ken.
Or Phyllis Lee. What about Phyllis Lee?
Into Pancras?
Yeah, Pancras. Phyllis Lee, was kind of notorious for having a stranglehold on it.
Oh, she put into Pancras.
Yeah,
go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead with your story.
I know Phyllis Lee, but
okay, good.
But maybe later or something, but not at this time. She wasn't around. I remember seeing her with Dan Severn at the UFC, but that was later. But at this time, you had to go through Ken to be in Pancras. So Ken came out and said, listen, he said that he knows everything he needs to know because of him training. He's been the head trainer. He doesn't need to learn anything from us, and he doesn't want to mess up his Brazilian jiu-jitsu with all our catch wrestling. And, it's just too rudimentary for him, But, he just wants to get jumped in so he can be in the Lions Den. And I'm like, what? And Ken's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. And Ken goes, hurt him. And I go, hurt him? And Ken goes, fucking hurt him. So we get in, we stretch out, we bounce around, and in, I'd say, the first 5 seconds, I hit him with the right fucking hand that it echoed. It sounded like a lightning going off in the warehouse, or thunder. It echoed. It hit him so hard, snapped his jaw, and he went back, stumbled back into his own corner with his arms wrapped around him and knocked out. I ran up, grabbed him by the hair, and was just kneeing the fuck out of his face, just busting, and our guys had to jump in and pull me off of him. They pulled me off, and we had some writer from Inside Karate or some magazine that was there to do an article. I pulled out my mouthpiece and I threw it at him, but it missed him. And then DeLucia pushed me out the front door, and he's like, what the hell's wrong with you? And then I, told him about what the dude had said, and so that guy gets awake, and he's all bloodied up from me kneeing him in the face. He don't even know where he's at, basically. And the tall guy, Ken, goes, okay, DeLucia, and you, whatever that guy's name, he said, you're next. And the big guy goes, fuck that. I want no part of that. And they drove back to LA.
Did you have any interactions with Rickson at all?
No.
Yeah,
a lot with Rickson stayed mysteriously away from any of us.
Yeah, I know you have some. I know
with Hoist.
Yeah. I know you have some strong feelings towards Rickson. I just wasn't sure where they came from.
The only strong feelings I have towards Rickson is if you're gonna say you are, then you better be. It's like I say I'm a lion. I can't act like a lion. I have to be a lion. You can't act like a king. You have to be a king. So all this bullshit that he threw out there, he's 400-0. Hilo, his own dad, said no, that he's full of shit. He's not 400-0. And then he cherry picked all these fighters in Pride, right? And then saying that he's the greatest fighter of all time. Bro, get in, and start fighting dudes, real dudes. And it just pissed me off that he was just so arrogant about it, And along with like Hoist after parties, him and his wife Marianne you could sit and chat, or like North Carolina, we were standing all around in a circle, and Helson was there from Hawaii, and Hoyler was there, and a bunch of Gracies and Lionsden guys, and we were just standing around in a circle bullshitting, and Ken and Hoist probably gonna have to fight later in the event, but none of us cared. We're all cool. And it was just Rickson that was the only one. So
it was just kind of standoffish. Okay, I get that. Let's talk UFC 3. Go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, wait. Let's go UFC 2. Ken Shamrock obviously makes a splash at UFC 1. And everybody, he kind of lit the country on fire. Like, this golden boy out of California is a badass dude. Obviously, he lost to Hoist, but he and Hoist, in my opinion, probably got the most, I don't know, I'm not going to call it heat, but the most favor with fans. Ken, however, was not in UFC 2, but he fought in Pancrase a few weeks later. Was he playing money games with them, or was there an actual issue? I had heard something with his hand.
No, I remember watching him sparring with Vernon, and I saw him put his hand down, and then he stopped sparring. The next night he came in, and I was teaching class, and he said, Scotty, come outside with me. And I'm like, fuck, okay. I come outside, he had a leather jacket, and he pulls his leather jacket up, and he had a cast on his left hand or his right hand. And he's like, I fucking broke my hand. I'm like, great, dude. So he was legitimately had a broke hand, which I'm telling you sucked balls, because Ken never let off any time on anything. And so for the entire time he had that cast on, he still cross-faced the shit out of us. Oh. I mean, my face looked like, I looked like I fell off a motorcycle onto asphalt, bro, every day after practice. His cast would be all bloody. He'd have to wipe it off. It was not cool. Not cool at all.
No. Good.
Since we're in the neighborhood, I'd like to ask you about Ken competing against Pat Smith, because that's a fight, and that's something you'll never see again, which is Pat tried to break his toes. Like, did you guys talk about that? Was that something that Ken was like, fuck, he almost broke my, did you notice that? Like, tell that, because I've noticed it, and I always wondered, wow, Pat Smith is a dirty motherfucker,
Well, no, I had years before fighting, I was playing football, and I think I was in a hotel in some town, and I was watching Kodashan, I think, karate, the hard style, or they punch, all that, whatever it is. And it was like the Detroit, whatever it was like the Detroit Nationals or something. And it had, and these are before I knew these guys, and like it had Jerry Harris, I love Jerry Harris. He's such a nice guy. But it had Jerry Harris and Pat Smith in the finals. And Jerry Harris is, he's like 6'8" or something. He's hella tall. But Pat Smith kicked him straight in the head and knocked him flat out. And so, I told Ken, the dude's a striker. But Ken he didn't care. No problem with it. Like, whatever.
Let's talk UFC 3. In UFC 3,
yeah,
Ken makes it all the way to the finals. Harold Howard was his opponent, and Ken pulls out, and Steve Jenham comes into the finals and gets his hand raised. What was that like?
Dude, for like 20 minutes or so. Okay, at UFC 3, they didn't have any, the fights, the alternates didn't fight. They were just there, right? So when Hoist threw the towel in, they were looking for Steve Jenham, but they could not find him. They looked everywhere, couldn't find him. I told Art, I got all my stuff. I'm ready to go. I'm in shape. You know that. I will step in there. And Art said, listen, if we can't find him, you can step in. And I'm like, oh, cool. Please don't find him. Well, kind of find out, they found him out in the parking lot, like getting ready to leave. And so they pulled Jenham back in. He got in the ring. Harold flipped over. Jenham mounted him. I don't know, 30 seconds later, he had a $60,000 check in his hand. I was like, oh, damn it.
Okay. Tell us what was going on. And just so people can understand, Royce Gracie fights Kimo Leopoldo. It goes, 7-8 minutes. We had Chris Brennan on a prior interview. He said that Joe Son was paying for privates through this guy Ziegler. Ziegler went with Rickson. He takes the information back to Kimo so Kimo could understand the movements, and Royce just had a hellacious time with them. Royce goes to the next round. The bell rings. Royce throws a towel in. I might add, this is a no contest on all of the record databases when it is clearly a win for Harold Howard. That's all I got to say about that. So Harold advances to the finals. Ken pulls out against Harold Howard. Was anybody trying to talk sense into Ken Shamrock in that locker room? All he had to do was show up.
Everybody. The whole thing was, he goes, tell them that my knee hurts. That's why I can't come out. And then I go, it was just me and him back there for a second because he wanted to be left alone. And I'm like, bro, between me and you, listen, I know you only want to go out there and fight Royce, but bro, this is like $60,000 in your pocket for fucking free, man. Just go out there. He's like, no, if I ain't fighting Royce, I ain't fighting nobody. So unless it was Royce, he wasn't going to fight. And like him and Bob didn't talk at all for like 2 months. Bob was so pissed off at him. So
where do you think that came from? Do you think it was, I mean, why wouldn't he just go in and complete the tournament? Is it pride, ego? What came into play?
It was because by that time he was starting to turn from the Ken Shamrock, my buddy, and also college football player and hang out kind of dude, to like, I'm Ken Shamrock. And I think he just didn't feel that he should be lowered to the point to having to fight someone like Harold Howard. That just wasn't worth his time. He wanted to fight Royce or nobody. And that's what he did.
Sometimes, Scott, that kind of honor, you can understand that. But at the end of the day, like, $60,000 is $60,000. Like, didn't he have like financial, like how could he do it? Like, what, like really not to worry about that too? That kind of is weird, no?
Dude, if they told me, bro, you got to get in there with an S&W 40 cal and execute a pedophile in the ring for us, if I'd have walked in, popped him in the head and said, give me my 60 grand. 60 grand is 60 grand. You know what I mean? That's what, and I could get through to him. I'm like, nobody cares about Harold Howard, dude. You're just going to win the tournament. You're going to put the money in your pocket. You'll get hoisted another time. And he's like, no, I'm not doing it, man. I'm not doing it.
And
like,
never
okay,
won a tournament.
Okay.
So, Scott, let me ask you. You were there for Harold Howard. Was he celebrating after his win against Royce Gracie? Canada pioneer.
Dude, at UFC 7, he was partying all the time. Dude, at UFC 7, we when we were both on the card, I think he fought Mark Hall, but they took us for the first time ever, because before Bob Marowitz just said, the only thing I need from you guys is have your doctor send in like a HIV and an AIDS test to us to show that you don't have them. And that was it. There was no drug test, or there was no nothing. But at UFC 7, we went and got CAT scans, and I guess that was the first time they decided to do that. Well, they pulled up this big, huge, like Hummer limo or something, and just Harold and I got into it, and Harold, just being Harold, he's so funny. He has like no front teeth. He's just hilarious. And we get our CAT scan done, and he's bullshitting the whole time. And on their way back, because we had to fight like either the next day or the day after, and he's all, what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, Simone is back at my room, so, I'm going to go get her and go do something. I'm like, what are you going to do? He's all, I'm going to go get a 12-pack and a pizza, and just hang out and watch TV. I'm all, you're going to get a 12-pack and a pizza right before a fight? And he's all, oh, yeah, no problem. And I was like, cool.
I was hoping your cocaine story was going around. Just saying.
What, my cocaine story?
Yeah, your cocaine story of watching a guy do a couple lines before he goes to the cage. I was praying to the gods of war. It was Harold Howard.
That wasn't Harold Howard. And no, there was an actor, though. If I told you his name, everybody knows him. That after the UFCs, he'd bring Ken and I up to his suite and rail out like 3 big lines for each of us that we'd rail up and go down to the parties. So he was cool.
He was all right.
A little silent shot.
Hey, guy shared his coke. Good dude. Good guy. This speaks volumes of his character. All right.
Oh yeah, it was hell. There was Ken and I, when I fought in Buffalo. He wanted to go to this huge bar in Niagara Falls in Canada, which was like the size of an airplane hangar, right? And he's all, we'll just drink cranberry juice or whatever. Okay, we go over the border, and he picks up a bartender to bring back to his room. And on the way back, he goes, Scotty, check this out. And I'm like, what? And I look, and he's got like a tin foil ball size, like the size of a fucking softball. And he opens it up, and he's all, look, bro, I bought a shitload of ecstasy because it's cheaper in Canada. And this is at the time when ecstasy you got like 25 years to life for. And I'm like, bro, you're bringing that back over the customs, over the border. We're going to prison forever. And he goes, nah, it's all cool, bro. They know us. And I'm like, oh God. But yeah. And then before the after party, I saw him in the hallway, and he passed me a handful, and I put them in my pocket.
Wow. Let's talk about the dance in Detroit. Another MMA conspiracy that we visited on past interviews. Ken Shamrock is supposed to fight Dan Severn in Detroit. Ken says that I guess they were told that they'd be fined $100 for every punch thrown. And Dan and Ken, in essence, danced around for about 30, 35 minutes, whatever the overtime period was. And I think Dan got one takedown at the end, and Dan wins the fight. But if you like combine all of the punches of all of the fighters prior to that, it was probably about $1 million fine, because those guys actually fought, but Ken and Dan did not. My conspiracy theory.
Dan actually got on top of Ken and bloodied him up a little bit with punches at the end.
I don't think I made it that far. I tried. It's like kind of like one of those movies, like The Wall, Pink Floyd, The Wall. You just can't make it all the way through. So I didn't make it
horrible. Yeah.
So, were you in the locker room for that?
No, that was after I started. I started my own dojo called The Unforgiven, and I had my own fighters, and that was before Ken and I made up, and it was, I don't know, I was back, I don't know, probably a year or so before he saw me jogging down the freeway, pulled his truck over, and we went to my house and kind of just made up, and
That's cool. That's cool.
And then I was going back to I was going back to Lions Den when I got the brain.
What did you hear? What did you hear about the dance in Detroit? Because our theory is Mark Schultz comes in as a last-minute replacement, makes first UFC appearance, makes just as much money as Severn and Ken. And as I think we can all agree in this conversation, well, I hope we can all agree, is that Ken's got a little bit of pro wrestling in him, and he's not afraid to hold somebody hostage, even if it means, doing something like the dance in Detroit.
Yeah, who isn't?
Mark Schultz came in that same UFC, and he fought Big Daddy Goodrich, and it was a last minute. They had to get him because somebody fell out, and he made just as much money as the main event.
Right. Well, he's Mark Schultz.
I'm Mark Schultz. Do you think that came into play of the dance in Detroit, like being what it was?
Well, okay. Here's my theory. The first time Ken fought Dan, for 2 months, only me wrestled with Ken, and I looked at pictures of Dan and video, and I acted just like Dan all the time, every single day.
Push
him up against the rope.
Wait. Oh, Scott, hold up. Would that mean you only went to buffets like Golden Corral and drove everywhere because you were too cheap for an airplane ticket?
Yeah.
Why, is that what Dan did?
Dude, we got a whole 1 hour, 45 minutes on Dan Severn. That's friggin' mind blowing. Continue. I apologize.
Okay.
This is a phone conversation. I'm doing jokes.
So I only was Dan that whole time. Now, then we went out 3 weeks early to Casper for the elevation. Okay. And, UFC, they'd pay for us because we're Lions then. So we could go out whenever we wanted. So then we got acclimated to the elevation. Then I still was only Dan when we trained, right up until he fought Dan. Now I'm in the corner. Dan comes out. It lasts 2 minutes. Dan does exactly the same thing that I had done 1,000 times before for the last 2 months, and Ken damn near popped his head off in 2 minutes. Right? So, worked perfect. The second time, I wasn't there. That's when Ken and I parted ways. And that was after that special came out about the world's greatest fight man, or that they called Ken or whatever.
World's most dangerous man.
There you go. And then Ken, that is the fight that I consider to be Ken Shamrock's retirement fight.
Okay.
Because the Ken Shamrock I knew he wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting not to lose. He was fighting to stay famous. And that's what I saw. It was pathetic. And the Ken I knew when he gave two shits about getting fined for punching anybody. And even when he was on top of Dan, he didn't do anything but lay there. And it just, I figured that's it. That's the end of his career. So,
well, both Bob
and it almost ended.
Both Bob Meyerowitz and Art Davie in our interviews with us both believe that was a worked fight between the two of them. And if you look at Dan Severn's illustrious history of pretend fighting, it's right up his alley. It really is.
The whole thing was, if you're going to do a work, you don't do it like that. That's not a work. For two, if it would have been a work, Ken would have told me it was a work when we got back to being buddies. But just like he told me about Don Frye and all that, what all that transpired, and he would have told me.
Okay.
And plus, you don't do a work like that. A work you don't circle fucking around. A work you can beat the hell out of someone. Let's just say for 2 minutes, and then in the last 15 seconds, he hits you twice. You go down on the ground. He wins. Yay.
Did Ken ever talk about doing a work fight with you?
Like us two working?
No.
Doing a work fight?
Him doing a work fight, like for a professional organization.
Yeah, I knew what all the work fights were.
So he has them on his record?
Well, I knew what all the work fights were for everybody. I mean, because Ken and I were friends. All the other guys were just young boys or younger. You know, Ken and I were older, had wives. We hung out together, went to dinner. I watched his kids for like a week when they went to Virtuosity. You know, that movie he was in with Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington. And so, you know, we talked a lot about everything. And so I knew about all the work.
So I think my specific question, because it's my fault that there's a little misunderstanding here. Did Ken ever do a work fight?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
of course.
Scott, were you around like some of the alleged work fights in Pancrase? Because that's where, you know, that stuff, there's always rumors that the early Pancrase things, like when did they go real and live and stuff like that. What's your take on that? Because you were actually, you know, a competitor in Pancrase, so you might, you know, your road might be different than Ken's. What was it like in Pancrase with the works, and how did they come up or not come up?
Well, okay, like when Ken was supposed to fight in the UFC, but he had to fight Funaki like just a week before. Funaki like miraculously choked him out in 52 seconds with a rear naked choke, right? Because, you know, their big thing was Pancrase didn't want their champion to look bad against like the other wrestling, like the NWA and the other guys. So since Dan Severn was part of that, you know, they always wanted to make sure Ken was okay. So there were different fights that were worked, and there were different fights that that one guy knew it was a work and another guy didn't even know it was a work. There were fights where they stretched the fights along to make them more, you know, exciting for the crowd. There were fights like even Frank now. When I read the interview, he said he looks back on me like, yeah, no, because they literally worked Frank right up the ladder. You know,
I agree with that. I agree with that. Now, you had mentioned obviously here that, you know, Frank was really unimpressive when you were on the mat with him. What were your thoughts of his UFC run and world title? Were you surprised by that?
I thought, okay, when he fought Lober, Frank had just worked on what was better to fight Lober, and took him 11 minutes, but he beat him. Jeremy Horn beat the shit out of Frank, and I guess Jeremy even told Pat, like in the 5th round or whatever, or 3rd round, he said, his jiu-jitsu is shit, dude. It's shit. He's all, and Pat's like, put him away. So Jeremy, he said, just accidentally, he shot in, his leg went out, and Frank just caught a lucky leg bar or knee bar. And then when he fought Igor Zahocevic or whatever, when he slammed him, that was just a freak accident. Kevin Jackson, he was just a wrestler. I mean, God, my little sister could have armbarred him.
Igor Zinoviev is who he's referring to. Igor Zinoviev.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, yeah, and he broke his collarbone, so that was just a freak thing. And then with Tito, see, Frank's whole thing, Frank would beat guys from attrition. And Napoleon once said that fatigue will make a coward out of every man. And so if you watch Frank with Tito, he just works Tito down until Tito's holding on to his ankle and Frank's just hammering him because Tito's just so damn tired to even get up. So Frank, he fought some guys, and I'm not taking any of those fights away from him, but he fought in a time of the UFC that was like the dark times. To
That's
where
fair.
they pulled the cable.
That's fair.
They all the fighters like Mark Kerr, everybody was jumping ship to go to Pride. Frank wouldn't do that because they wouldn't give him a set contract. They would just call you and be like, okay, you're fighting so-and-so in 2 weeks. So that's why Frank quit the UFC. They just weren't paying. They couldn't pay him anymore enough. But I can't be really against his title run because that's really all he had the guys he had to fight. You know what I mean?
Sure. So you had mentioned Tito Ortiz a couple times in this podcast. Guy Mezger and Frank Shamrock have got wins over Tito. Do you think that may have haunted Ken, and maybe that was the reason he couldn't let that rivalry go?
Well, the thing about Tito was when he came out with that gay Mezger t-shirt,
Horrible.
And that
cancel him.
Yeah. And that's already after guy guillotined Tito for the tournament and won, and guy had a broken hand when he did it. So to come out with a gay Mezger because you won this fight, but he won the last one, that really that triggered Ken big time. And the only problem with that was the prime Ken and the prime Tito. That wouldn't even been a fight. That would have just been Ken fucking tearing him apart like a small dog. But at 42 or 45 or however old Ken was fighting Tito, the first fight he did his best standing up, but he was just too old by then.
Okay, so we're talking about state of California. We talked about the Gracies. We're talking about the Lions Den. That alone, there's a lot of personalities there. Like there's a lot going on. And then you add in Tank Abbott, the Huntington Beach people, where he's got Tito in tow and Eddie Ruiz. And those guys, Tank and his crew, were known for fist fighting other UFC people at the hotel, either before, even after the events. Did you guys ever have any run-ins with like Eddie Ruiz and Tank Abbott and those guys?
No, like I said, me personally, Tank to me was always like super cool. Tank and I never had a problem. Now, I don't know why Tank and I never had a problem. Maybe it's because everybody that's ever seen me when I go to jail, which I don't know how many times I've been in jail, when they say, like, I come across a pod, they say, dude, you know, after my celly, I'm in there a week. He's like, bro, I thought you were like a serial killer, bro, by the look on your face. Your eyes are dead and shit. So maybe it's just the way I held myself with Tank, or because I wasn't like really all boisterous with him, whatever it was. Tank and I got along well, but Tank also, him and Paul Herrera and his crew, they jumped Pat in like Casper and beat the fuck out of Pat Smith in the elevator.
Yeah.
And Maurice, I was down the hallway, and Maurice pulled him out. And then they all said, "Oh no, just Paul did that." And I was like, "Yeah, right."
Did Ken and Tank? They never fought. There never seemed to be even conversations with those two names in it, and they're driving distance from each other. Did Ken and Tank get on? Because Ken's got a pretty big ego, and Tank can be pretty rough.
I think that at that point in Ken's career, to fight someone like Tank would have been like him stepping way down into class-wise. You know what I mean? He was super fight champion. He, you know, and he was at that time Ken Shamrock, and you know, I just don't think he thought Tank Abbott would be worth shooting in on and submitting. You know, just
I know Tank used to throw like the glam rock name at him, but it wasn't like with the zest that he would do for other people.
Yeah, no, the actually, and Tank was really funny, and one of the best lines I've ever heard from anybody was after the Ultimate 96 or 5, after, you know, I broke my hand and Joe tapped me, and I come out and I'm sitting next to Ken and Tina right at the cage side, and the doors are right there. Well, Tank fought Dan Severn, and Severn just basically laid on him and slapped the shit out of him for 30 minutes. Well, Tank comes out of the cage, and the reporter goes, "Well, so how'd it feel like having to fight Dan Severn?" And he just deadpans goes, "Well, it was like being raped by Freddie Mercury." I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome."
I got a couple more. All right, I got a couple more.
Huh?
I got a couple more for you. I mean, Miguel, what are we time?
Okay, yeah, go for it.
We're doing pretty good. We're coming up on 2 hours. I'd like to take a couple of minutes to talk about Indiana as well. So,
all right, let me get through these.
Go for it.
You got time, Scott? Okay, cool. So
no, shit, dude, I'm retired. I got all time in the world. So,
well, I'm gonna get through all the questions then. So are you, Miguel? All right. So Don Frye, and Ken Shamrock, they fought, and there was a lot of bad blood between the two of them. Nobody ever said what that bad blood was.
Right. All right. Well, since Bob is dead, and it's actually in an interview, and Ken told me what it was Don. And here's the thing: Don was in like Dan Severn's corner and stuff, and Don was always really cool. He was like a firefighter. He's always really cool to us. We talked about wrestling. He was kind of quiet, and then all of a sudden he just kind of went nuts. But I don't know. But he went in an interview. He went on an interview and was slamming Ken, and then said, "Well, you know what? You know, his father Bob is gay." And you know, he said that in the interview. And so, you know, Ken told me when we were talking about it, he said, "Dude," he said, "really?" You know, he said, "He brought in my personal business." He said, "Dude, if my dad fucked monkeys, would it matter?" I'm like, "No, bro, you don't bring that shit into the media." So Ken said that he would fucking die in the ring before, you know, being beat. So that's why, like, him and Don knocked Ken flat out, and Ken sat up like a zombie. And Ken broke both Don's ankles, and they went hard, but then they made up and put it aside. So
okay, so Ken was doing the right thing. He was, defending somebody that he cared about. What are your feelings towards Bob Shamrock? Bob Shamrock.
Bob and I never got along ever.
Okay.
For one, I didn't get really along with him too much because I did in the beginning, but it was because after the Lions Den thing, like Ken and I were friends, and he didn't like that. It was weird. He didn't like it. We all, with his wife, Tina, we all hung around together. We did things together, different than the other fighters. I was the only one, like if you see the Lions Den guys, when they get introduced, it says they're managed by Bob Shamrock. But mine says managed by Ken Shamrock. Bob didn't manage me because Bob, what they did was they had all the fighters sign 5-year contracts where they paid 30% of their purse to pay back for all the food and lodging and all the stuff that they did for all these guys. But between me and Ken, since I ran the dojo, since I did this, I did all that other stuff for him, Ken and I never had a contract, and I just paid him 15% of what I made every month. And
that's fair.
So, Bob, and Bob we just didn't get along. He wanted me to be more. I argued with Ken in the dojo. He didn't like that. He wanted me to be like one time Jason DeLucia said, you know what? He said, Ken doesn't have any friends. He just has disciples. And Bob wanted me to be more of like that, to like look up to Ken like with admiration. But, I'd been in professional sports. I looked up to Ken like, hey, this guy's teaching me a lot of stuff. I can learn a lot from him. We were good friends at the time and all that, but I didn't look up to him. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Bob and
you looked at him as a peer, not as somebody that you're supposed to admire. Which you're kind of supposed to be.
And Bob he didn't really like that, So.
Okay, so Ken broke Leon Dijke's ankle, and he always insinuated there was for a reason behind it, but I couldn't find it. I don't know.
He does dance around the idea. I've heard in different interviews of guys telling me that he says that it was for a reason. My take on knowing Ken and knowing Ken back then, Ken back then became different as he became an older fighter. But back then, I think Ken did it to Leon just because he wanted to hurt him. That's my point of view. I mean, Ken just liked hurting people.
Ego.
I mean, well, not just ego, just like I am. I enjoy hurting other dudes. And like Noah and I, Noah was Ken and I's first student, him and Mike Baladeros. And Noah lives right next to me, and we still laugh about the training with Ken because Ken, he never showed us how to get out of a submission. He just slapped you into submission, and you either tapped or he broke it, period. And so it was up to you to learn how to get out of it. So we did all learn. Like, I only tapped once in my whole career, and that was my first fight. And that's because I just got caught on that crazy heel hook going backwards thing. But we just learned on our own how to defend it because we didn't want Ken to break it. So
So you and Ken
personally, he just wanted to hurt him personally.
Okay. So you had mentioned that you and Ken made up, which I think is very admirable. In his book, Shamrock, he had some less than, I don't know, favorable things to say about you. Meanwhile, you bled with him.
I don't know what did he actually say. I still don't even know. People have said he did, but I don't know what he said.
I don't have direct quotes, and I did not read the book. Although I'm an avid reader. I've got a whole bunch of stuff I've got to get to prior to that. But I had read from people, I've heard from people that said that, oh, you know what, he said some negative stuff like he should have quit. He was too dumb to know that he should have quit was one of the quotes I had heard. I don't know. It was just a lot of ego, especially with somebody that essentially, I'm assuming you didn't get paid and you were one of the chief instructors at the gym when Ken was traveling. Am I correct?
I was the one that ran the gym when Ken was traveling. I'm the one that found Jerry Bohlander and Pete Williams when they're taking my submission class after a while and said, hey, Ken, we got to look at these guys. And so I'm the guy that should have quit. Okay, was that when I was on a 4-0 record and just got the fastest standing submission in the history of the UFC, which still fucking stands today? Is that the guy that should have quit? You know what I mean? Or the guy who just signed a huge fucking deal with the UFC when, I think him and Oleg and Dan had one. Is that the guy that should have quit? Or is it the guy that was sparring with him and liver kicked him and dropped him and he got furious and we never sparred again? And then a couple years later, we were wrestling, rolling, and I got him in a heel hook or in a toe hold. He wouldn't tap. I said, fuck it. Went to break it. He fucking punched me in the fucking jaw, broke 2 of my molars, and then almost neck cranked me. Almost broke my neck. I'm tapped. I'm on all 4, blood pouring out my mouth. Jeff Massalia is all, that was a little rough, dude. And Ken's all, he was going to fucking break my foot. And I said, dude, should have tapped. And he goes, I don't tap. So, and then we never wrestled again. We never rolled again. So is it that, who's he talking about? For him, he's got this distorted view of,
Is this ego that fragile in your opinion?
Like I said, his ego, if you repeated to him about what I said about the sparring and the rolling, he'd flat out, he would say no. And there was guys watching it and he would just still say no. His ego is incredible.
Okay. So were you there during here, 2 things. We were told that whenever somebody that was really good came along, that he would take them to a different room because he didn't want anybody in the gym to watch them roll. Is that true?
You mean before they got jumped in, or what do you mean?
No. Let's just say Oleg Taktarov came or Mark Coleman. I'm leading up to a Mark Coleman question. So Mark Coleman said that Ken wouldn't go with him live in front of the other students. He would have to go to a private area with Ken.
Okay, I don't know about Coleman because I wasn't there, but I do know about Oleg, and Oleg trained with us all the time. And matter of fact, Ken would tell me, kind of go easy on Oleg because I would just dominate him. And he said, I don't remember. So maybe, and when he wrestled Gokor in Japan at the Pancras Dojo, and I'd heard all this shit about Gokor being so great. Well, he kept pestering Ken to roll with him in the ring there at Pancras. And Ken had just had some chips taken out of one of his elbows, and he goes, well, okay. Finally he goes, okay, dude, we'll roll. Just don't grab that elbow because it's, still, got stitches and stuff. So Gokor immediately tries the elbow. But 20 minutes, Ken just fucking dominated him like a child. And I was just like, whoa. you know, from what I heard, I thought Gokor was good, but he wasn't at all. So I never saw Ken take anybody somewhere else and wrestle with him.
So I got a question from the line of hard training. Mikey Burnett fought a UFC title fight, and there was the rumor going around he was flat in the fight and against Pat Miletich. And there was the rumor going around that Ken had knocked him out in training like about 5 days before the fight. Is that something you can confirm?
I don't know. Ken, I can literally say that before fights at the UFC, Ken would have me fucking with Maurice Smith and shit, you know. And I'm talking the night before the fight. And there was one time dude, I'm so beat up and tired. I come back, I just fall down on my bed. Simone's like, "What is going on?" And I'm like, ordering orange juice from the room service. And I was just like dying. And yeah, he would do that before one fight. I think Buffalo, we went to a boxing gym, and he wanted me to shoot in on boxers, and I'm like, what the fuck? We're supposed to be fighting. I'm not a wrestler, damn it! Stop making me do this, you know. And yeah, he had some really out there kind of stuff. So
yeah, pretty raw, yeah.
Well, hit your Indiana questions, Miguel.
All right, so one of the interesting, I'm going to ask you about hook and shoot in Indiana, because Scott, you know, there's a thing. I worked with hook and shoot for years, but you were there before I was there, and there's something I'm very, very jealous of, and that is that you saw the fights in the wood-paneled room.
Okay, I didn't hear. You're kind of like bouncing.
Oh,
about
okay.
Who?
I was going to say, I said that I'm very jealous of the fact that you predate me, that you had been to hook and shoot before I was there, and that you saw the legendary fights in that wood-paneled room. There's like a little wood-paneled room where you took Lance Trammell to fight, and you were cornering him. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was the first hook and shoot. Yeah, I remember that. And Lance was California Golden Gloves, and that's when I had my own dojo, the Unforgiven. And he was also went to the finals, national finals in Gold Gloves. So, wow. You know, we come out, and I still have my Lions Den gear because Ken hadn't kicked me out. So I'm like, fuck it, I'll wear it. I fucking was in it since the beginning. And I think Lance had on something like that. But we get in there, and it was Scott Sullivan's gym, right?
Yeah.
The kickboxer.
Yep.
And we walk in, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? Because I'd only fought in the UFC and Pancrase, the two biggest promotions on the planet. And I'm like, what's going on? And then they had mats out, and I see fighters, you know, Jason Canales, who used to be one of my students at Lions Den, and then got in extreme fighting by saying he was a Lions Den fighter, but he wasn't. And there's other guys. And then Lance stripped his clothes off, and I could hear like a really silent, oh fuck. And he says Lance was fucking buffed as fuck. And this kid, Dave Barney
Yep.
something.
Yep,
Dave Barney, I think. Okay, he's gonna fight him, and this kid's warming up, and Lance looks at me, and he goes, and he was serious, and he goes, bro, he said they're not gonna make me fight him, right? And I said, yeah, that's who you're gonna have to fight. He said, oh no, dude, they're not gonna make me fight him. I said, yeah. He's like, I'm like, that's how it is sometimes. And he's like, okay. So he got in there and just blasted the fuck out of him and had him down on the ground, and he's just smashing him. And then he looks at me, and the ref comes in, but I guess Barney said he was okay. But Lance looked at me. He's on his like one knee, and I just said, "Dude, fuck him up." So Lance just smashed him, just kept smashing him, and the fight was over, and that was that. And we were like, okay.
What'd you get paid? What did Lance get paid for that?
$350.
That's not bad.
And
that's not bad.
I can tell you that from watching the video of that, that's one of the things that made me a HOOKnSHOOT fan. That whole show was filled with mind-boggling stuff, but that was a mismatch. Like he said, people react to Lance. The guy looks like an athlete, and David Barney is not an athlete. There's a moment in there where he's trying to pull guard, and you can tell that it's not, there's not muscle memory going on there. He's just trying, So it really was.
Oh no, and
beatdown.
Oh no! And when Lance looked over me, and he looked like confused, like a deer in the headlights, confused. Like, what am I still supposed to be smashing this dude? Because he's crumpled up in the corner, and I'm like, fucking beat the fuck out of him. So Lance just keeps on crashing him, and finally the ref stops him. And then when Lance is done, he puts all his stuff back on, and the fights are over, and we were going to Hooters for the party. And on the way over, Lance is all, "You know what, man?" He said, "I feel kind of bad for beating the hell out of that guy like that." And I said, "Bro, listen," and I said, in this game, man, I said, not everybody is on our level, and you just do what you do, and you fuck them up until the ref pulls you off, and nothing. You don't have to feel bad about it, And he's like, okay, but he felt kind of bad. He thought he was going to get a little bit more resistance than that.
Yeah. Now, didn't Lance fight Geza Coleman too?
Yeah, and then we did one in a arena and an auditorium, and I was supposed to fight in the main event, I guess, for a belt against one of my ex-students named Mike Kennedy. And this little bitch he ran his mouth on, Jeff had this phone line thing. He ran his mouth like for months and months, and I'm like, dude, I'm gonna stomp you in your throat when I get you into the ring. And then Lance was supposed to fight Geza Coleman. Well, Kennedy not only never showed up at the fight, but Jeff said that he found out that he never even went and got on the plane. He never even went to the airport. He just stayed home and just decided not to come. So Lance fought Geza, but Geza got him down on the ground and thumped him up with a ground and pound. And then Nick Starks asked me to be in his corner when he fought
Gary Myers.
Iron Bear, Gary Myers.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're fighting, and and I'm just looking at Nick and Gary, and I'm just going, there's really nothing I could say that's not just going to stop Nick from getting a severe ass kicking here. So, I'm trying to help, but there, Gary he was just too strong. And then Jeff came out and said how Kennedy backed out. I got the belt and all this. And with the auditorium, he said that Scott doesn't mind if you'll come up and answer questions, and he'll answer them. So a bunch of guys came up and asked me a bunch of questions. Half of them were, I heard all you guys, it was all fake. It's all pro wrestling and all this. And guys like that, I'd say, well, come up here and I'll show you what a heel hook is. I'm like, no. and that was that one.
Hey, my question is, how was your hotel experience in Indiana? Because, the first time I went, Jeff picked up my hotel room, but I killed 10 crickets in that room. So just so you get an idea of what goes on sometimes at the lower levels. What was your experience like with the whole show? Like that, the travel, everything?
It was well, okay. The first one, I still have the program for it, just because I keep everything. Because when my son buys a house with his wife, I'm gonna sell it all at auction and give it to him for a down payment, because I have a lot of stuff that nobody else on the planet even has or knows even exists.
Wait a minute.
So
wait.
The
Do you
first
have do you have the purple cape that Ken walked in with?
No, fuck no. We unfortunately when we moved when we moved dojos, we went from the little dojo to the warehouse dojo. All over our walls were posters of the UFC, the one that Australia Vernon fought in, all Japanese, all our stuff all over the wall. And I go, Ken, what do you want me to do with all these? And he goes, I don't know, tear them down, throw them in the garbage. So I did. Later, I'm like, oh fuck, I just threw away like thousands and thousands of dollars worth of stuff. But I have the program for the first hook and shoot, and it's just papers, like mimeographed and stapled together with a ticket on it with your like picture and everything. So, he started out really small.
That's wild.
That's awesome. Scott, man, we could probably keep doing this for another couple of hours, but we're at about the 2-hour mark here with the podcast. And, we're going to take a rain check, hopefully, for a future conversation. Just check in and say hello. Just, this has been fantastic for us. As you can tell, we're both kind of nerds about the sport. And, you give a lot of insight and very, very honest, like you said, you're not going to, we got a lot of great stuff here. And I'm very, very appreciative, Mike.
Yeah, man.
Oh, no
Scott.
problem. I mean, and dude, I got hours and hours and hours and hours of stories since I was there from the very beginning. So anytime you want to do it again, great. And also, I got a shout out, and that's to Aaliyah Wright, who she's already a best-selling author, and she has another book coming out in less than a year. So I told her I'd shout it out for her. So.
All right.
So, well, why don't we double back with Chris, give it a little time and space. And, I've got more questions, and we could probably come up with a whole bunch of other ones. I think Chris would probably, he's obviously a burn up this weekend. Yeah. So Scott, we're going to double back with you. We'll just give it a couple months. All right, buddy. We really appreciate your time.
I got
no problem at all, man.
I got one last shout out, Scott, and I want to ask you this question. It's a shout out to Jerry Bohlander. Like, I was friends with him back I was at all his UFC fights live and hung out with him in Abu Dhabi. Like, he was like somebody I knew pretty well. I've reached out to him to do an interview like this. Are you still in touch with him?
No, no. When Lions Den went to San Diego, which Ken lied to me about it happening, and he just left, took the Octagon and went to San Diego. After that, I've never talked to Pete or Jerry again. I've just heard, he's a sheriff and he's killed 2 dudes here so far in California. That's all I know. Shot them both. That's all I know about Jerry.
Let's close with this. If you had words for Frank Shamrock, like if you saw Frank Shamrock today, what would you say to Frank?
It would be different than it would be. What it would be now is we have gotten older, and I now realize you had your own problems with Bob too, and whatever happened between us, and you know what it was, shit happens, brother, and it's all just good.
Now, what would you say to Ken?
To Ken?
Yes.
I don't know, because I'm not sure if he's like, with Ken, I would just tell Ken, tell the truth, bro. It works a lot easier.
That's kind of hard for him, though. It's hard for him.
Huh?
That's hard for him.
It is, but he keeps getting caught up in his lies, like how he got into the UFC, and then Bob said he did, and then art came out in a book and on my page and in Sports Illustrated and said exactly how Ken got in the UFC, how through me, through the black belt ad, and then Ken has all this different stuff that he says. Oh, the Lions Den started with, I had kickboxers I trained with, and but what fucking kickboxers are you even talking about? He has like this whole like, I don't know what it is, but it'd be nice to hear him like just talk like about what really happened. That would be cool.
So Scott, when we interviewed Art Davie, he confirmed with us that he talked to you and you were the one that put Ken forward to him. He said that to us.
Yeah. Well, I see the letter that WOW sent me, you know, when I sent in that thing, I got it from WOW Productions. I didn't touch that letter. I sold that letter in that envelope to MMA Museum for $1,000. So I'm glad I didn't touch it. But I called Art. We talk about the different fighters. Were they real? What I did, this and that, and about Ken. We talked a long time, and he finally just said, well, Scott, you know, you're an athlete. You played professional football, and you just started doing this. He said, just, you know, go ahead and be honest with me. He said, right now, who would be the better fighter for this, you or Ken? And I said, Art, to tell you the truth, you know, Ken is my teacher. I've just started, so I really think Ken would be better for this, for you guys right now. And Art said, okay. He said, go ahead and give me his phone number, and we'll get him into this first one, and then I'll get you in one right down the road. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, Scott, you're a true pioneer. Yeah, you're a true pioneer and an actual good friend, because rather than try to hog fame or glory, you passed on your own well-being and put somebody that you respected ahead of you. That's what leaders do. And I got a ton of respect for you, man.
Yeah, and in the beginning, that's how we were. And that's why when he burned me after I left and everything, and all the shit that he says, I'm like, dude, really? You know, everything I did, and this is how you act. Like, whatever.
Yeah, you know? It's like an alternate reality.
It's crazy.
It is. It's like an ego. It's an ego thing. And somebody asked me on an interview or in an underground forum thing or whatever, have I read his last book, Shamrock? I said, well, no. I did a shitload of interviews with Jonathan and texts and things that Ken said I would know about, like who was cheating with Tina Ass, Scott, he would know, or steroids selling and all this stuff. I said I did all that, but I'd never read the book, because why in the hell would I read a book about something that I was actually there? I was there doing it with him. Why would I have to read a book about how great he was, how he did everything, how he was the king of the world, how it was you know what I mean? Why read some fantasy bullshit? You know? So
yeah.
Scott Bessac, you are a savage. You're a Viking. Man, this is a phenomenal interview. This is you gave us everything. You answered everything. You didn't dodge anything. Questions that you weren't comfortable with. You just said, rather than avoid it, not comfortable, let's move on. There is nothing in this interview that was said that makes me believe that you are anything other than truthful. And as a fan of the early NHB era, I sincerely appreciate your time. Thank you.
That was gold, man. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Hey, it was great talking to you guys, man.
Take care.
All right.
Well, Mike, hey, we've made a roaring comeback with the history of MMA, and now I think we've topped ourselves. Scott Bessac is in the books, and you've got then deep dive, Mike.
Well, here is the thing. If you look at what he said, it's explosive in nature, but you also need to kind of understand maybe where it's coming from. The issues he has with Ken in regards to the book seemed completely separate than this. Like, I've gone on this podcast several times. The people that I worship, the guys that reach their hand down to pick somebody up when there's absolutely nothing to gain, and in the future, something appears to make money, like Carlson Gracie Sr. And I used to also include Bob Shamrock. And this interview really, it kind of hurt. It kind of hurt listening to that. Like it always imagined like a virtuous guy that was nothing but good. And Scott didn't really come out and say it, but he kind of did. And that hurt. That hurt me.
Yeah, I think it leaves it open to interpretation. It's like, especially in modern times, it's all right, to be, like, what we don't know is if he actually crossed the line with Frank, crossed the line with Ken. There's a hint of it, why do you adopt a 21-year-old man and stuff? But to take a name like, Frank Vasquez or whatever it is that it was, and become Frank Shamrock, I can see the marketing aspect of it. And if it was platonic, then he's really literally done nothing wrong. And it's just a little bit of a black mark that people are putting on him. It compares to our other interview, Mark Schultz, where there definitely was a line crossed and it turned out to be murder. And it's like, but, let's draw a line between the two and show that Bob, we have a lot of good that he did, and nobody's really accused him of breaking a law or breaking that type of thing. Just, a little behavior that was a little different than some of the other people. So I don't know. I don't know that it's all that terrible. I don't think that his legacy.
It hurt me to hear it.
Okay, and that's okay. I remember him as he was very mellow, very gentle, kind of like, an older man in sweaters and things, and like a clean freak. That's what I remember about meeting him at a couple of UFCs. And
what gave you that impression that he was a clean freak?
He's washing his hands and just like he wouldn't shake my hand. He wouldn't shake anybody's hand that I could see. He would touch his fighters. I don't know. It's like, but like I said, personally, everybody can feel however they want about it, but I'm not so sure that that's such a black mark on it. The guy is also machismo and things. Ken might not like it being mentioned and that sort of stuff. But again, we're in the 21st century. I don't think that we've talked about Bob Shamrock breaking any laws, right? So,
well, but he kind of insinuated that he may have dabbled in breaking laws.
Psychological abuse and sexual abuse and stuff, if it is very complex. The victims may hide it, and if that's the case, then that is
or cover for them. Yeah, it's like Stockholm syndrome.
But I don't know that we have enough to say that that's not a little bit of speculation. Him treating.
Well, he never came out and said it. He never came out and said it either. So let's. It hurt. Well, here, what
I goes there, but I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not sure that I'm ready to tear down Bob Shamrock statues yet.
Fair enough. I agree with that. I'm certainly not building them either. Secondly, Ken Shamrock using methamphetamines.
We were talking about it offline, and there is an underworld in this sport, and meth is a drug of, what do you call it? Pleasure, or it's not steroids, right?
No, dude, it's extreme pleasure. Like all your endorphins dump out, and
it's another word I'm missing there, but
it's a very sexual drug.
But it's recreational. It's not like steroids where they would have also. So, like, we didn't even get to talk steroids with Scott. He mentioned himself that he used them, And, you know, he went from 280 to 220 in his fight career. So at some point at 280, he must have been pretty jacked up. You know what I mean?
Think about this. All the crazy shit we talked about, he dropped steroids, and we didn't even stop there because everything else was much crazier.
You know, Ken talking Bob or his family into the pink bag being one of the fighters' bags and things like that. It's mayhem. It's just sheer mayhem. But I think that there is an underworld. I think Ken is one of those guys. You know, you get guys like Gray Maynard that go back to their hotel room and they're like, "Oh no, I wasn't there." You know, like Joel de Oliveira. Like we thought he would be at the front of a bunch of mayhem in Brazil.
Yeah, Leonard Garcia.
He was like, "No, I'm home, man. I'm you know." But I think Ken liked the risks. I think that's part of the personality. And yeah, you got some wild stories, man.
Man, that was I've got more Shamrock questions, but they're more later on. And you know, Chris obviously couldn't join us. And we actually technically could do a pretty good part 2 with what we have set aside, especially like the later on in Ken's career stuff. And we can also hit Scott Bessac's career. Listen, Vegan Hagler, I know you're going to comment and be upset about us not touching Ultimate, your favorite UFC event. I was going to save that for when Chris is here, you know, as well as the pancreas stuff. One of my specific questions that I kind of chickened out on because I wanted to get an answer without a flat no was were Ken's pancreas losses fake fights, rather than I said are fake fights on your record. You know, sometimes you kind of got to give up a little leverage on a question in order to cross a finish line and then kind of figure out where the race went. And there's a couple times in the interview where I kind of formed the question a little bit differently in order to get an answer rather than a no comment.
It's funny, a couple of times too, you ask the question, then you ask the same question about Ken and then Frank, you know what I mean? And it's like in Frank, he did mention that pancreas worked Frank up the ladder, Scott didn't use the word worked without knowing the repercussions of what that word means. So they helped him, and part of that was the Shamrock name and Bob's influence and stuff. So is that a little, you know, distasteful and stuff? Yeah, but you know, in the fight game, you get your advantages and stuff. So I think that's all baked in and stuff. And Scott, a real honest soul, man. I'm glad to have met him here. And sign me up for part 2 with Lytle. Lytle too.
Yeah, Lytle, enjoy that. So I was on a different podcast prior to this. Miguel actually was on it as well, called the Fighters Podcast. And we interviewed, well, Miguel wasn't there, but I interviewed Ken on it where we brought up Bob and his brother. I asked a whole bunch of questions that Ken normally doesn't get asked, mostly Japan related. And it went really, really well. And what I took from that interview is that sometimes people can be less than truthful, but really believe it, even though they're lying. And Ken's personality falls into that category. Like he's a homeless kid that went to a boys' home that became a world champion. Like it is something that is written about in movies, but there's a lot of baggage that comes with that.
It's very hard to handle, especially like a meteoric rise. Like, I mean, I know he had his build with the wrestling and stuff like that, but once he was in UFC, it probably had an effect of like very quickly becoming, like Scott Bessac said, it's like they'd go to a bar, he'd greet and you know, deal with everybody, come in to say hi and shake his hand and do autographs. And then once he'd been there a while, everybody talked to him, everything settled down, he'd get all hyped up and want to go to another bar and do it again and go through the whole cycle of feeding himself his ego and never chilling out.
Wow.
Never chilling out. So, yeah, and I think that's the, you know, the extreme, like the rumored story that he had a girlfriend and his wife on separate rooms in the hotel. You know, Scott gave a story on his end that was very similar in what's going on in your mind? You're taking a risk, or you're getting off on that risk. And I think that's the type of personality that Ken was. Smoking meth while being a professional athlete. Not everybody, you got to be a special athlete to pull that off, even for a little while. Thankfully, Ken didn't go down toothless, but he dabbled probably a little too much too, So all those types of things are personality dings that, he suffered fame that he wasn't ready for.
Yeah, the drug use was shocking to me. Yeah, the drug use, and Miguel, both of us have been divorced in the past. We're both on our second marriages. And candidly, we've told each other that we've made some changes in this relationship because of some of our actions that we might not have been proud of. Whether we want to talk about them or not, it wasn't cool. Maturity, life happens. We're going to try to do this one right, even if it means saying no to things that look very desirable. And the thing with Ken is, I don't think he's capable of having that conversation because now he was really good in a relationship, and it's I don't think he's got the ability to see himself as doing anything wrong.
Yeah, I think that at some point you hear so much about how great you are in terms of fame and especially a guy like him, because he's not Elon Musk obviously is famous, but his fame, he was an athlete resonates in a different way. People are impressed by them in a very different way than an intellectual or anything like that. So Ken is always great to everybody around him. And you expect some human introspection to let be careful. That's not true. So if he has no introspection and all he's hearing is he's great, he really feels that. He really feels he can get away with things and do things that other people don't do. And that's part of the rush. So it's a cycle too. So, Ken's always been an interesting psychological case. And I think
he really is a fantastic study. If it turned out he was a serial killer, I think he probably checks a lot of boxes that fall into that category. It shouldn't be a huge surprise.
I was around Ken a few times. There was one time in New Orleans that Ken showed up, and that may have been the time with the girlfriend in the hotel or that rumor. And Bohlander and Williams were both fighting, and Frank was fighting, but Frank was already with Maurice and TK. So Pete and Jerry, it was Ken was coming back for him. But they were fighting, and still it was all about Ken. The other guys were in the background, in the forefront and stuff. Was Ken. Ken put himself there. Ken's ego dominated the room. Ken also played peacemaker in the lobby of the hotel with bikers and the fighters, and there was going to be a big ruckus and stuff like that. And Ken dominated the room and went off with a biker arm in arm, hanging out, they knew we were from wrestling. And they dealt with, somebody made a joke about kicking the bikes over or the bikes falling over, and they didn't like it until Ken straightened it out. So, he was in his glory. Those are his moments. He likes being the center of attention in every way, shape, or form.
It's interesting. Friggin' interesting, man. I could listen to Lions Den, Bessac, Shamrock stories, whether it's Ken or Frank. I can listen to that all day, man. How would we go over we broke the 2-hour mark, and he wasn't slowing down.
Yeah, no, he could have kept going. And there are a lot of things. We really did miss a lot. We really didn't talk about Burnett or Bohlander or P or any of those fights.
And we didn't have enough time.
Yeah, he mentioned early guys. We didn't talk about what's the kid's name? Joe. It's a plain name. It's not Joe Smith, but he was a Lions Den guy that fought Brennan and those guys.
He fought a King of the Cage. I know you're talking about. Yeah.
I don't remember his name, but he mentioned Agar Chin, old school guys. We talked a little bit about Lance Trammell, and I forgot that. I froze up. I forgot to ask him why Lance stopped fighting. Maybe it was because he pummeled Dave Barney so bad that he didn't want to do it anymore. But yeah, very interesting stuff. So yeah,
that's good stuff. Well, Miguel, what you're describing is part 2. Well, let's just see how the downloads go on this one. Let's see if people actually like, share, and subscribe it. And if they do, we only concentrated at, like you said, Ken and Frank and Bob Shamrock. Meanwhile, there's Pete Williams, there's Jerry Bohlander. Like it would require a little bit more digging on our end, but it'd be well worth it because, there's gold there. Vernon White.
Yeah, Vernon is actually probably the most prolific of the Lions Den guys, right?
I agree with you. Maurice Smith.
Yeah, I don't know if Maurice is an official line. I guess, Scott said that they were around, like they stopped kicking shin to shin because of Maurice, thank God. And so, yeah, they were all interconnected, but officially Lions Den, I'm not, we can ask Scott next time. We can start with that.
Yeah, that's what we do. We come up with the lineup, Lions Den, yes or no. He would have probably oral arguments for both sides. Either way, ladies and gentlemen, like, share, subscribe. We got a t-shirt coming probably in the next 2 weeks. We're going to be looking at the comments. If there's a unique way you can share this program, it'd be the easiest way you could get a t-shirt. Even if you're in the Faroe Islands, there's 2 people in the Faroe Islands that listen every episode. It'd be nice to, maybe see a little more growth there, if it even is possible. But either way, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your listening, and that's another episode in the bag.
In the bag, MMA history with Scott Bessac, and thanks, a big shout out to Scott.
Check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.